Hey everyone, in this episode of Real Recovery Talk, I have on Maya and Nicole. They are therapists here at Rock Recovery Center. In this episode, we're getting into depression and the things that you can do to combat depression. If it's for you or somebody you know, we give you action items that we ourselves have implemented in our lives to help us with our own bouts of depression. In the end, we're all human. We have some level of depression, chances are, at some point in our lives. And so we take a real deep dive into depression and the things that you can look out for and hopefully nip in the butt before it gets too bad. And in the end, if you have any questions, you can email us info@realrecoverytalk.com. Enjoy the show. Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we've got Maya.
Yes, we do.
We also have Nicole.
Yes, hello.
First things first, thank you for tuning in on the podcast app, whichever one that you choose to use, and thank you for watching on YouTube. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us, info@realrecoverytalk.com. Again, that's info@realrecoverytalk.com. And ultimately, we want to help you turn your mess into your message, right, ladies?
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Best episode thus far.
I think I missed my calling as a radio personality.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm subjecting myself to this.
You love it.
But
yeah.
anyways, how's it going? Good?
Good.
Life is good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Life is good, man.
Saving lives?
Yeah.
Yep.
Day by day?
Yeah.
Moment by moment sometimes.
Saving and changing lives.
So I wanted to bring this up, and I thought to myself, I said, self, what two better people than to discuss...
No, you didn't.
You sold that well, though.
I said self. Okay, sorry.
This
Go.
is going to go well.
I know. I couldn't. That was so good. Okay. What two better people?
What two better people than to discuss this topic than Maya and Nicole?
Yeah.
Maya and Nicole, as we know, as you should know by this point, they are licensed clinical social workers, and so they're well versed in this type of stuff. And I thought it'd be better to have them discuss this rather than me try and fumble over my words and try and, best discuss depression. Reason I wanted to bring this up was because I have this program on my computer, and it kind of gives you a lot of trending topics.
Yeah.
It's called vidIQ. Shout out to vidIQ. If you have anything to do with YouTube, you probably know what vidIQ is. And as of right now, one of the trending, not trending, but it's got a very high search, bless you, search, volume.
Hits. There's a lot of hits.
Yeah, a lot of people are searching how to overcome depression.
Yeah.
And vidIQ in and of itself kind of knows my channel and knows what we discuss, so on and so forth. So I'm like, I don't think I've ever really discussed it. Mainly because I don't know. I don't have a therapeutic view of depression. I think that I'm more of but primarily because I don't suffer from it, like actual real, could I say I've been depressed in the past? Absolutely.
Like circumstantially.
Yeah, of course. But never suffered from any sort of clinical depression or anything like that. So my view of depression is skewed. I'm more of the go out, lift some weights, go on a run, yada, yada, yada. And that doesn't work for a lot of people. So I'm not in a position to be able to discuss this. That's why I wanted to do this.
Yeah.
Because it's an important thing, primarily because the vast majority, and I'd like y'all's opinion, of addicts and alcoholics that suffer from addiction, I personally haven't met one that isn't dual diagnosed in some capacity with depression and or anxiety or both.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's interesting. Well, first of all, you know what I was thinking when you were talking about vidIQ? I was thinking, and it was talking about like the amount of hits on people searching overcoming depression. The irony is that like people being in front of technology on screens, on the computer, surfing the web, if you will, social media, is definitely, I think, contributing to the increase in depression that we're seeing societally speaking. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I was just thinking, God, the irony of that.
Yeah, totally.
You know? But then also I think it's important to start this off with like defining what depression is. And actually it's a cluster of symptoms. It's not, or emotions, if you will, such as, and thoughts and feelings, I guess. It's a thought process and an emotional experience, but it's a cluster of stuff. It's hopelessness, it's despair, it's negative core belief systems, and it's, you know, I mean,
will you pull up the definition of depression?
Hypersomnia.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about the criteria in the DSM-5, and part of that, I think that a lot of people tend to think that like depression is just like crawling into a fetal position and being in bed crying, but not so much. I mean, it looks different for men. It also, in a lot of ways, growing up, like a lot of teenagers, adolescents, it can look like acting out. It can look like rage. It can look like anger. But really underneath that, there's a level of depression. And also it's like, it's a feeling of dauntingness, that things are just heavier. Things just feel heavier to do, daily tasks. There's different criteria in the DSM-5.
Very limited motivation, hypersomnia. It and you were
what's hypersomnia?
Sleeping a lot, like oversleeping.
Yeah,
and also it affects appetite. Also, like you can overeat or undereat when you're experiencing a period of depression. So it impacts like your thoughts. It impacts your feelings, the feeling that you're having, but also it impacts your behaviors and how you're essentially how it's like. How you're functioning in your day-to-day life. And that's when it becomes a disorder, is when it starts to affect your day-to-day life.
Impairing functioning in social, occupational, stuff like that. But also, like, it's interesting because your thinking, feeling, and behaving is all linked, right? In other words, emotions lead to thoughts, thoughts lead to behaviors. So they're all
intertwined in some capacity.
Right. So, and depression can happen. It can be as simple as the neurochemistry stuff in terms of like a lack of or depletion in dopamine and endorphins and that kind of thing. It can be a chemical imbalance, but it can also be self-imposed in terms of having a distorted thought process, like maximizing things, black or white thinking,
catastrophizing.
So it's very complex. So but go ahead with the definition.
Yeah, so I pulled it up, and so normally when you diagnose somebody with major depressive disorder, it's within a 2-week period of having 5 or more of the symptoms. And so I'll look at those symptoms, and if that person is having some of these 5 or more within a 2-week period of time or more, then that usually means that they've had some type of episode of depression. And obviously, like, sometimes it's moderate, sometimes it's low, sometimes it's high. And that can depend on a lot of different things going on in their life. It could depend if that person is on medication. That's another thing. I've struggled with depression and anxiety my whole life. And so even with taking medication, it still comes out. It just, I don't stay in it as long as I used to. It just allows me to kind of move through it in an easier way, but it doesn't mean I don't experience it. So I think it's the reason I'm saying that before I get into this is because people think like, oh, I'll take a pill and it'll be gone. Like, then it's fine. But if you put me in a dark room by myself with no coping skills, no supports, I'm still going to feel depressed whether I'm on Lexapro.
Right.
So that's because most people aren't depressed because their epinephrine or their serotonin is depleted, which is what the SNRIs, SSRIs are helping with. SSRIs are serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So they're inhibiting from the serotonin being metabolized as quickly, and therefore you have like a surge, an elevation happens in your serotonin levels, which is a feel-good neurochemical. And that gives you that boost that you need, just enough to get you to that state of being able to motivate yourself to then go into action to do things that will then pull you out of the depression. And
yeah, which we'll get into that.
Yeah.
Not to cut you off. What's the definition?
Okay, so to be diagnosed with MDD, which is major depressive disorder, a person must have 5 or more of these symptoms during the same 2-week period, like I was saying before. So depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. Loss of interest or pleasure in activities. So that's what we call anhedonia. Or even like to another degree, there's apathy. So, when things that you normally like doing, you have no interest in. Possible thoughts of death or suicide, other symptoms such as poor appetite, overeating, insomnia or hypersomnia, low energy, low self-esteem, or difficulty concentrating. Symptoms must be new or have worsened compared to the person's pre-episode status. Symptoms must not be clearly attributable to another medical condition. So we always want to rule out any type of medical condition that could possibly be impacting them. But once you rule out medical and you're just looking at these symptoms, then that's something to look at.
So that means like you just got diagnosed with cancer. Obviously, that's going to make you feel depressed in some capacity.
Traumatic brain injuries.
Yeah.
And, there's actual medical conditions that will impact stuff like that. You name it. You could have a brain tumor.
Yeah.
I mean.
So, we obviously treat a lot of people here. We come across a lot of addicts, a lot of alcoholics. What would you say, out of on a percentage basis, how many of the clients that come in here would you say are diagnosed with depression?
Oof.
So and I think it's important that we touch on this because if you look at the neuroscience behind addiction, in other words, what happens in the brain during active addiction, essentially substances of abuse hijack your brain's reward system. And so things that used to bring you pleasure it's actually designed that way, such as food, sex, being in community with one another. Those Safety. Are actually, that's a survival mechanism in your brain because we need food, we need sex to perpetuate the species. It's survival of the species, really. It's designed that way. But these drugs of abuse, what happens is they hijack that reward system and they throw the dopamine, endorphins, serotonin into overdrive. So just to give you like a rough idea, it's like 90 units of dopamine per neurotransmitter produced for sex. It's like 100 for food. Methamphetamines is 1,000. So, and then what happens is now the things, that's why you see addicts that are like into their addiction and the progression of it, sometimes they're not bathing, they're not eating.
Because it doesn't bring you any sort of reward.
Exactly.
Correct. They found a chemical substitute for the natural things that are supposed to be rewarding for us that is far superior to those natural things. But then after they stop the use, there's a period in time where they're actually now going to be depleted, which is, by the way, like what creates cravings for them. Because during that time of depletion, their brain is actually producing mass quantities of cortisone and stress hormones. And so a lot of times for addicts, craving is more about staving off those uncomfortable stress hormones. So it's more about staving that off. Like, yes, they're seeking the euphoria and the effect, but it's more about staving off those uncomfortable stress hormones. But anyway, so they're depleted initially. So like we talk about it all the time, Les therapists, it's like, it's hard to like give them like an official, like a lot of times we'll diagnose them with depression unspecified.
Right, because a lot of times when they come in, they're experiencing loss of interest or pleasure as a result of their brain not being able to produce those chemicals on their own because they've been substituting it with a drug or alcohol or whatever it is. And so when they come here, they don't even know their baseline. Like they have complete anhedonia, apathy, and so that could be a substance-induced depression. Sometimes people have depression way before they pick up. And that could be because they've always had, maybe they suffered from depression and they self-medicated in some capacity. This makes it worse. or some people it's drug induced. So within the first few months, I think it's important to assess the clients because we don't, you're going to see a lot of these symptoms as a result of their addiction. So it's hard to say this is what they are.
It's like going from driving a Ferrari to a golf cart.
Yeah, seriously.
I got a pretty badass golf cart.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or
yes,
like I always
know.
think of fat burners. So when you take a fat burner, it increases your metabolism, and then a lot of times when people stop taking them, their metabolism slows down. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. I think, I've had many conversations with parents over the years, and one of the main questions, and it's not even a question that they ask, it's more of a statement. I just don't understand why they're not motivated to do anything.
Yeah.
And I never went into the science behind it because honestly, I don't know if I didn't know it or if I probably didn't know it, but it makes total sense. But what I do end up telling a lot of the parents, and not even with depression and anxiety, but even like going into like bipolar and schizophrenia and stuff like that, one of the questions I always ask parents is, how long have they been clean?
Yeah.
And they're like, never. I can't remember, the last time they've had any clean time. And I said, well, it's not fair to give them any sort of diagnosis until they can put together some clean time, because oftentimes what at least from my perspective, a lot of these symptoms subside.
Sometimes they do.
And the brain is the human body in general. All of our organs are phenomenal in terms of their capacity to regenerate. But the brain is resilient, man, and it's plastic, and it will heal. It just takes some time. So a lot of like the post-acute withdrawal that we talk about, that's what it is. It's your brain chemistry, et cetera, trying to heal itself. And they're laying new neural pathways, and that takes time.
And we've had clients that we've seen those symptoms dissipate over time, and we tell them, like, if you need a medication to kind of help you in the beginning stages, and then you wean yourself off of it or whatever, taper off, and then they don't need it. Some people need it.
And
it really
a question
depends.
that's good to ask, like in those scenarios, what you were just describing is like, think back to before you ever started using, and tell me, were you anxious then? Were you depressed?
Right.
Then? Because that can kind of give you a little possible insight into what their baseline may be.
Right.
But a lot of times my clients will go, no, not at all.
Or I don't remember.
Yeah, that too. But so sometimes in those cases, I'm like, well, then chances are this is due to coming off, substances, et cetera.
And then there's the trauma piece too, where that can have an effect in the way your body responds to things, your brain, and trauma literally can change the way your DNA is read and transcribed. So that plays a part as well. I know, like, for me, that was my story, So
trauma for you. Yeah. Now would be a good disclaimer. None of us are doctors, so any medical stuff we talk about, don't take it as medical advice, because Dr. Tambini's not here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a valid point.
Yeah, valid.
Very valid. We should.
Okay, so we've established that there can be many, 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 many reasons somebody suffers from depression, whether it be excess substance abuse, trauma, some sort of environmental, sociological, genetic.
It's a fun word.
There's tons of precursors, I suppose, that could initiate some level of depression. Now the question is, what do we do about it? And I think that's what a lot of people are searching for. And I think a lot of people run to the Lexapros and the medications. And don't get me wrong, they definitely hold their place somewhere in this scope, but it's not the end all be all. I have somebody in my life that relies on medications for a lot of things. And I can't help but think, well, there's more to it than that.
Oh,
sure.
100%.
So let's get into that a little bit. We have somebody that, let's just say, okay, you have 90 days clean.
Mm-hmm.
You have 90 days clean. You're doing okay. And I'd venture to say we have a couple people in our care right now that fit the bill for this.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do? Like, what can we do as, and not even as a facility, but as a therapist, right? Say it's a private client of yours. What are some action steps? And we'll go from there.
So yeah, getting a therapist is, I think, number one.
Yeah. Asking for help.
Of course.
Yeah.
And yes, and medication in and of itself, it's not any different than just putting a Band-Aid on the issue. In my opinion, that's what I was saying earlier, and I don't know what the statistics are, but most people, I would say, that are experiencing depression, it's not as simple as they just have a chemical imbalance. Most of the time it's life circumstances, it's trauma from the past, childhood, etc., that all leads up to this, I think. And so getting a therapist is so beneficial. And I think that in and of itself even is action that's, I think a lot of times with depression, there's like this sense of like despair and like hopelessness. Mm-hmm. And so taking even the smallest little actionable steps towards helping yourself in and of itself is healing toward the depression, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, because those symptoms are designed to keep you depressed.
Yeah.
So it's literally doing the opposite of what that is saying for you to do. And I think the first step is, I think there's a lot of stigma, and thank God we're in a direction where it's dissipating, and mental health awareness is really big today, and people are talking about it. So I think it's important to just ask for help. Like that's the first step is doing that. Mm-hmm. And, whether you need medication or not, that's something you can discuss with your therapist and your doctor and that kind of thing. But that alone isn't enough. There has to be those action steps, and there has to be things that you're doing to take care of your overall well-being in conjunction with the medication if you are on a med. Because like I was saying before, if I stay in a dark room by myself, I'm going to still feel depressed. So there's things that I have to do that I would encourage other people to do, whether that means having a therapist that you talk to once a week. Like if it means that day you take a shower and you haven't been showering, like that in itself is a big deal, especially when you're in a state like that. Journaling is something that I've always really enjoyed that helps. And I always tell people to journal, and you can bring that back to your therapist, because oftentimes in a week time, you forget how you felt, you forget what happened, but you can scale it 0 to 10. How did you feel that day? What was some of the stuff that happened? What were some of the things that you kept to yourself that you didn't want to share with anybody? You kind of tucked away. Write that down. And then you can start seeing, like, what are some of these things that bring this up for me, and what days are worse, and what happened? So it's kind of like collecting data on yourself in a way that you can process with your therapist. But I think journaling is really important, like basic stuff, like making sure you're taking care of your hygiene. I'm talking about somebody who's like in it, right?
Like severe depression.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Eating,
drinking water, like going outside and taking a walk for a little bit, because sunshine gives you that vitamin D and it's really good for your mood. Making sure that you have supports around you that you can talk to.
Vitamin deficiency is another reason people can experience depression too.
Yeah, sure. I know there's a lot of studies on that. In particular, vitamin D.
Vitamin D is the big one, yes.
And go ahead.
I mean, it sounds great, but we know there's people out there that they can't or they won't. They're like, I don't want to say bedridden, because full damn well they can get out of bed. But outside of having somebody literally dragging them out of the bed to do these things, what do you say to those people that just can't or won't do it? I mean, I suppose there has to be some level of willingness.
Yes.
Yeah.
To some degree, whether it's even just the smallest amount.
Well, and I think like even like with the substance use disorder, there's a progression that happens. So it's not like you have your first drink or drug and then within, a week you're
full blown IV heroin user.
I think it's the same with the depression. And so I would say to people, be vigilant with it. In other words, be willing to respond to it, and as opposed to allowing it to progress.
Right.
Because you're talking about something that is going to completely zap your motivation, your willingness, your level of willingness to do anything about it. And then you're going to sink deeper and deeper and deeper into it. You're going to become completely isolated, you know. And remember when I was saying, like, thinking, feeling, and behaving, it's all linked. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. So, like, in other words, like, if I feel a feeling, let's say I'm feeling depressed, I may have thoughts of, and this is just me personally, I may have thoughts of, like, why am I bother staying sober if this is what I'm going to feel like? Or this isn't worth it. This is too hard. I might as well get high. Next thing you know, or, you know, I might be thinking, like, nobody cares about me. Nobody loves me. You know, some of these thoughts might start happening. And then next thing you know, I'm not going to meetings anymore. I'm isolating, or I'm going to get something to pick up and use. So in other words, it just leads. It's a cycle. Thinking, feeling, behaving. Thinking, feeling, behaving. Thinking, feeling, behaving. And you got to throw a wrench into that cycle. And I find that the most tangible one of those components of the system would be the behaviors, because changing thinking and feeling is difficult. Let's be honest. I mean, it's definitely more
next to impossible in some cases.
Yeah, it's tough.
Well, and there's a lot of those thoughts and, like, linked to the feeling is deep rooted into like other core beliefs and things of that nature that are coming up. But this whole conversation is reminding me of this quote where it's
wait, can I finish?
Oh, yeah.
So I was going to say the most tangible one of those that you can kind of target would be behaviors. It's more tangible.
Yeah.
Like, I can be like, okay, this is what I'm doing right now in my current depressed state. I'm isolating. I'm not talking to anybody on the phone. I'm sleeping all of the time. I'm sleeping in the morning. I'm not exercising. Like, we can kind of identify, like, what are the behavior, or you guys, if you are experiencing it, what are the behaviors I'm exhibiting right now? And then let me come up with what are some, just come up with a list of, like, some behaviors that you know that would help you to kind of move you out of the depression. Like, let's say going for a walk, like Nicole was mentioning, some of them journaling, etc. Like, these are the behaviors, and trying to implement, because ultimately the behaviors will then impact your thinking and your feeling.
Move a muscle, change a thought.
Act as if. We have that saying. Act as if. There's a reason.
Never heard that.
Act as if you're an AA
Really?
guy.
That's not an AA thing.
Yes, it is.
Oh, I always what's no, I've never heard that.
Yeah, act as if.
Well, I think
Yeah.
that's an NA thing.
It's like, you know, like, no, it's not. Google it, Nicole.
Wait,
Hang on, what's your quote?
So I was going to say, it reminds me of, you know, the change happens when pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change.
Right.
And so I think it gets to a point where we all have to get to a bottom, if you will, whether that's addiction or your mood disorder or your trauma that's impacting you in your day-to-day life, whatever it is, that pain is a lot greater than actually doing the work. Because either way, you're going to exert energy. Whether it's in staying the same and having to deal with all of these maladaptive ways of coping, or putting that same energy into doing some work. You're still expending energy. So it's about where you want to put the energy.
Yeah.
You know, and we all have to get to a place where, like, we've had clients that do not have the willingness to want to get themselves out of that situation. Because there's something they're holding on to. It's serving them in some way, as messed up as that sounds, because you're like, how is that serving me? But there is something. We do everything based on cost-benefit analysis. So there's something that makes them hold on to that.
Well, it's familiar.
Yeah.
Comfortable to them.
It's so strange because you see people that, you know, you just want to grab them by their head and, like, shake them.
Yeah.
And
100%.
say, like, what are you doing? But, you know, it's easy to say behind the microphones.
Yeah.
But, you know, I've never experienced it in that fashion.
Yeah.
So, you know, and God willing, I never will. But I can't help but think that, you know, there has to be some level of willingness to want to change. Mm-hmm. and there has to be action followed up.
Yes.
You know, we can't rely on the pill. You know, you can't just rely on a medication. I think that it's definitely, you know, in terms of the medication, and we see this a lot with, you know, anxiety medications, which will wreak havoc on people. You know, the Xanaxes, the Ativans, Klonopins, those sorts of things, the benzodiazepines. I mean, those things will destroy somebody's life.
Yeah.
Just as quick as they helped you, they will also destroy you. Yeah, me too. The way that I try to explain those types of medications from a non-doctor perspective is anxiety is in the brain. You know, a lot of times it's generalized anxiety, some sort of social anxiety. You know, people are sometimes just anxious, you know, and you can see it. My gosh, like, and then I get anxious. I'm like, oh, now everybody's fucking anxious. You know? But anxiety left untreated now turns into panic, you know, and now I get into this panic attack and now I feel like I'm dying. You know, my heart starts racing. I feel like I'm having a heart attack. I get a headache, you know, all these sorts of things. And this is from experience. And then I find Xanax and it's like, oh, and to an alcoholic.
Yeah.
You know, I remember the first time, and I've shared this on the podcast, I went to a primary care doctor in Pennsylvania who I'm not one to go to doctors, but I'm like, I just don't feel right, you know? And I walk in, say, doc, I just feel like uneasy, yada, yada, yada. All the signs of anxiety. And he asked me, how much do you drink? I don't know. 3 to 4 beers a day, blah, blah, blah. Severely minimizing. Writes me a script for Ativan, you know, 0.25 Ativans, you know. And I had no idea what these things even were.
Ativan was my first benzo.
Yeah. And so I leave with this script of Ativan. I think I'm 22, 23 at the time. Literally zero education on this medication. Like nothing. Yeah. Didn't say it was addictive. Didn't say
anything.
Nothing.
Oh,
just,
God.
hey, take this, you know, and we'll see you in whatever, 90 days. And of course I don't go back, you know. Well, I get in this cycle and I start realizing now what benzos really can do. Well, actually I stay in this cycle because the reason I didn't go back to the doctor is because I no longer needed to, because I got into a relationship with a lady who was a nurse.
Oh,
and she
perfect.
had
Your plug.
Yeah, she was basically
convenient.
my plug.
Yes.
So she gave me all the benzos that I needed. So I had no need for the doctor. But I enter into treatment 3 or 4 years later, and at this point I'm popping Xanax like it's my job. And I didn't realize, even at that point, the severity of benzos. And I went into detox and I blew zeros. And knowing what I know now, had I gone into the detox facility and blew 0.0 and didn't have benzos in my system, they would have said, why, you know, the
Why
insurance
you're
wouldn't
here?
approve
Yeah.
it, you know? So thank God I had benzos in my system. But then I started learning and really kind of, you know, getting educated more on these types of medications. And where I'm tying this in and how I explain to parents and loved ones and stuff like that, these benzos can be very beneficial if given appropriately and if education is around it. Like, here's a script for 30 days. And I wish all doctors would do this, but we know they don't. Here's a script for 30 days, Maya, 0.25 Ativan. You're going to check in with me on a weekly basis. You're going to go and you're going to get a therapist because I'm going to educate you now on what anxiety is. It's in the brain. It's in your mind. It's actually good to have. You know, our body's supposed to have anxiety, you know. You're going to go educate yourself on it. You're going to get a therapist. I'm going to give you some resources, and I'm also going to tell you about this medication. And I want you to build some coping skills on how to deal with anxiety, because we don't want you to get to the point of having a panic attack, because then you feel like you're going to die and then you're going to go into, you know, like, you know, all this stuff. You've suffered from all this. So that's what we're going to do. And at the end of 30 days, you're going to come in, we're going to evaluate it. And if we need to do another 30 days, we can, but we're not going to do anything more than that. Just because from my perspective as a medical doctor, I know what these medications can do to people, and I don't want to see you go down that path. So we're going to be steadfast in education.
It's like a training wheels.
Yes,
crutch.
we're going to, and simultaneously, we're going to build the skills necessary to deal with anxiety. And I think if they could be handled in that fashion, they would be very beneficial for people, because it's one thing to go to a person that suffers from debilitating anxiety and say, you know what, you just need to meditate.
Yeah.
You know, just download the Headspace app.
Meditate.
You know, go for a walk. And they're like, no, fuck you.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't understand.
Yeah.
So I understand the premise behind the medications, but the same goes as the SSRIs and the SNRIs. Even though they don't wreak as near as much havoc as the benzos do, it still reinforces the ideas that I can just take this pill and everything's going to be okay, when in fact we need to do these other things.
It has to be the work. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
And, you know, God, benzos, man, they're very effective in eliminating anxiety, because for me, anxiety was my story. And when I first started taking, Ativan was my first. And believe it or not, I was like 13. I was having like a panic attack. And my dad, anxiety runs in my family. So my dad had panic attacks and anxiety. And he went and took one of his Ativans and told me to put it under my tongue. That was my first benzo.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Which it really helped.
Yeah, of course.
Of course it did.
Hell
Yeah. I mean, I was like, woo.
This is fun.
Yeah. But man, it's a central nervous system depressant. And talk about like, because we need our nervous system. It's how we are
survive.
Yes. It's how we're interacting with this, it's a part of how we are experiencing the present moment and assessing the present moment.
Fight or flight. Like,
correct.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why when I started abusing Xanax and benzos, my central nervous system was completely shut down and offline. And man, I became like
catatonic almost.
Oh yeah. And then also like, I was wreaking havoc because it's almost like it took away any kind of like social cues for me or anything. Like I the only way I can describe it is like I was Superman. Like I would literally like look at you straight in the face and like steal your purse from you and be like,
and then help you look for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you had no level of, because I was the same way. When I was on them, it was literally the last 3 years of my using is a blackout. I don't remember.
Yeah, well,
any
that
of
too. It takes chunks of memory away.
And like what you were saying, I would love if doctors educated people on that. And just not just like not saying all doctors do this, but like give pills and be like, just do this. But I'm thinking like, even if it was an addict or alcoholic in their addiction, they would be like, oh yeah, that's great. And they would still use it as they want. You know what I mean? So I think that's a huge piece too. Like if you have the disease of addiction, not taking any type of benzodiazepine, you know, if it's somebody who doesn't and they are able to take it as prescribed with information, education, therapy, not rely on it, great. But my mind went to, if an addict that I'm treating does that and goes to the doctor and the doctor's like, yeah, let's do this plan. They'd be like, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'll do it. And then they'll go home and abuse it anyway.
Yeah. But even for the non-addict, there's such a physical dependence on it.
That's true too. Yeah,
that it's
for sure.
like,
it becomes a crutch. They don't.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you 100%. I think that, you know, I do think that it's wishful thinking. I do think that there's people out there that, you know, alcohol was their drug of choice and they suffer from anxiety to the point where it's very unbearable. So I agree with you 110%. I do think, though, that, you know, you got to speak to the people that just aren't going to go that route. And they're going to go and they're going to get the script, you know, for a low dose of Ativan or whatever. And I think that if there were more regulations maybe put in place or more accountability around it, you know, because if you think about it, like, alcohol is my thing. Benzo is my thing. Mm-hmm. I personally wouldn't take them because I know full damn well, you know, what would happen. But I'll tell you this, if I go and I walk out of the office and get smacked by a truck and I need opiates, I'm going to take the opiates. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But just having the educational piece, I think is very important, and we lack. And it's unfortunate though, because doctors, I mean, what's the average length that you see a doctor now is what, like 3 to 7 minutes or something. A doctor, given their caseload and stuff like that. It's
I had my last primary care doctor. I saw a new doctor. She was with me for an hour, and I was like shocked.
Wow.
I know, and now I'm like,
was it insurance or did you pay out of pocket?
No, this was insurance.
Wow.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
She also, she asked such thorough background, diet, like she did a full workup on me, like more extensive than just the basic
that's good
panels and stuff. Like I was just thoroughly impressed with her.
I went and saw a cardiologist.
Yeah.
And he spent, 15 minutes with me. All, and my biggest takeaways were to stop using nicotine and stop using coffee. I'm like, well, this was all for nothing.
Yeah. I got lucky with my doctor too, because similar experience. Like, he was the only physician that I've ever seen that asked me about trauma, that asked me about my upbringing, that went in thoroughly about my history. And he actually realized that I was extremely vitamin deficient. I was low on my B12, I was low on vitamin D, and I was low on iron. And my mood was getting low. So now I'm like, okay, what is this about? I was tired, I was fatigued, like very similar symptoms of depression. And because I've suffered from depression and anxiety most of my life, I'm like, oh, this is familiar. But then not realizing that was also a big part of it. So I started taking vitamins, and now it's helpful. But he did same thing, thorough questions, spent like 45 minutes with me. That's like unheard of.
Yeah.
I know. And
so
that's
shout
sad.
out to Dr. Savin.
That's so sad, because had he have just done the typical 10, 15 minutes with you, he'd have been like, all right, let's up the Lexapro.
Right.
See you later.
And I had a doctor say that to me once, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to do that. I want to see what's really going on with me,
So let's get back to, because I want to wrap this up, the depression, in particular, the action items. So we got, obviously, see a therapist. I think that is first and foremost, and even if you're a parent and you have a child, let's say they're an adolescent and there are symptoms of depression. Maya, I like what you said, that it kind of, depression in and of itself can mimic addiction in a way of it could be progressive. So catch it as early as possible and do some sort of intervention. And if you have a child, some sort of child therapist or whatever. Journaling, I agree 110% on that one as well. I personally used to do it, don't now. I know there's so many benefits to it, and a lot of times people think, oh, that's kooky, I'm not gonna, but there's something to be said about
putting pen to paper,
putting your thoughts down on a piece of paper, and being able to look at that more down
objectively.
The road.
Yes.
And the more consistent that you get with that, the more normal it becomes, and the more normal it becomes, the easier it becomes. But now you have a log of things good and bad. I do think that, nutrition is going to play a huge
diet
huge
is huge.
Again,
Caffeine intake.
Yes. When I first got sober, I was on Seroquel, as most people are. And again, I've shared this on the podcast numerous times. My routine in terms of nutrition was coffee all day, take my Seroquel at 8 o'clock, simultaneously hit the preheat button on the oven, bust out a DiGiorno pizza, put it in the oven. My Seroquel would kick in. I'd eat the whole pizza and a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I wouldn't eat anything all day. I'd wake up in the morning, same thing, sucking coffee down all day, Seroquel obviously played an effect on that. But, I don't want to make this all about medications, but that's another one that I think is way too over prescribed.
Yeah.
I had adverse reactions to that.
Did you?
Yeah.
First time I took it, my knees started knocking.
I got restless legs bad.
Oh, I didn't. I felt loaded.
Oh, really?
Well, I was in detox. Well, I was in residential.
Yeah.
And I wasn't on
What do you mean your
anything.
knee started? Oh, you mean like you got weak?
I got like wobbly.
Oh.
So I'm out in the smoking section and I see these people that are like, they look like they're zonked out.
Yeah.
I'm like, what the hell are you guys on? They're like, we just took our night med, Seroquel. I'm like, what is that? They're like, oh, it's to help you sleep. I'm like, really? Okay. Yeah, just tell the doctor you can't sleep. Next day, go see the doctor. Doc, I can't sleep. And I was sleeping fine.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
He gave me 100 milligrams Seroquel.
Like a good
Like
addict.
good addict. I was
Yep.
just thinking
And
that.
I'm like, all right. So I took it that night and I was out there smoking a cigarette and I remember it to this day. Stood up and I'm like, whoa. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like just that feeling of like drowsy but loopy and, you know, all the things that was really enjoyable. You know,
That's what I was hoping for. And then I took it and I got restless legs and I couldn't sleep. And when I was pacing and I wanted to die. It was so bad.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, I ended up on that medication for 6 months, you know,
Oh,
from
wow.
that time. And going back to the nutrition, like what you put in your body is directly going to affect how you feel. And
my
I
God,
felt
yeah.
like absolute shit.
Well,
And even
you were eating nothing or putting nothing in your body with
Right.
any nutritional value.
right.
Period.
Yeah. And even to this day, almost 14 years sober, food is something I have always struggled with. Like again, it's no secret. Like I have an issue with sweets and processed food and stuff like that.
Yeah.
When I eat good, and I'm not even saying all meat, vegetables, and salad and all that
Just cleaner.
shit. Just when I cut out the processed
Yeah.
stuff, I feel better.
Yeah.
Yes. You know?
Totally enhances your mood.
Yeah. So the nutritional piece, and that coupled with,
Exercise.
yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
100%. So that was my personal journey. When I first got clean, my anxiety was, because now I'm giving up my Xanax and my opiates, and my anxiety was,
Through the roof.
whew,
Yeah.
because now I mean, I was on benzos for 20 years. So
Oh,
now
wow.
I'm like trying to come into reality again without something that's like helping my anxiety. Man, I mean, my anxiety was intense. And then, you know, they put me on buspirone, gabapentin, again, the meds, blah, 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 blah. I took them during treatment. But my end goal was I don't want to be on these meds forever.
Yeah.
And so I started talking to people and talking to my therapist. And I started the journaling and I started praying and eventually meditating. That wasn't something that I did right off the rip. But then it was exercise that I started implementing. And that was a game changer for me.
Yeah.
When I tell you that my exercise in my recovery has probably been just as important to me as my 12-step fellowship meeting attendance, step work. I mean, it's all like right here. Because eventually after treatment, tapered down off of those medications, went completely off. And that was 7 years ago. And don't need anything. And it's rare that I experience anxiety. Every once in a while I will. Usually mine is rooted in fear. There's some anxiety that I have that I know now today is natural and normal. Like like you were talking earlier, we're
Yeah.
supposed to experience, like surrounding like major life events and graduations and, you know, and test taking and the stuff that would normally create anxiety. But in terms of like just that like baseline anxiety that I dealt with my entire life, even like as a kid, it's gone. And I honestly, like on the days that I work out 5 days a week. So every once in a while on the days that I don't exercise, I'll feel, not that I have like the anxious thoughts necessarily, but I feel the physiological manifestation of the anxiety where kind of like I can feel it in my chest, if that makes sense. Anybody that, you know,
Well,
struggles.
it's the same as what you would utilize it's now a tool in your tool belt. And if you forgot
Yes.
that tool at home,
Yeah.
it's like,
Right. And it's the same for the depression. The
Right.
exercise is just because you're pumping, you're creating dopamine. There's a runner's high.
Yeah.
Dopamine, endorphins are being.
never experienced that.
Oh, I
Runner's
have.
high.
Yeah, no, I hate running.
I
I
love
do that
it.
with like weights.
I love it for that reason. The runner's high.
Yeah.
because it's like
Yeah.
a surge.
How far do you have to run to
I
experience
know,
runner's
seriously.
high?
Typically around mile like 3.
Nope, good.
Yeah,
I'm
no
good.
thanks. Yeah.
2 to 3, really.
There was walker's high. That'd be cool.
Oh, that would be great.
Well,
I
if
would
you
love
get,
that.
it's just a matter of getting your heart rate up, elevated enough, and then keeping it at that level for a little while.
That sounds awful.
It's
Yeah.
good.
But I think it boils down to doing something for your mind, your body, and your spirit.
Yeah,
and
mind,
if
body,
you have
spirit.
like everything, a little bit of everything to kind of vitamins, if you will, for each one of those. I think that's an important. Those are little behavior changes.
Well, it's supplement.
do.
You know, it's just like the medication. You would use it. You know, it's like a supplement almost. You know,
Yeah.
supplements are. You know, and even if you look at like macronutrients versus micronutrients, protein, carbs, and fat, those are your macronutrients, and then you have micronutrients, and then there's essential nutrients, non-essential nutrients. One your body produces, the other don't, you know? So if you're lacking in vitamin D, you could take a supplemental vitamin D, you know, those sorts of things. And all these action items per se are things that we can sprinkle in,
Yeah.
but you know, it takes action. Like you have to do it. And the one thing that you touched on that we didn't discuss is the spirit aspect of it. You know, there's something to be said about spirituality, you know?
Absolutely.
Connection. And I include that in spirituality. Like there's definitely like the spiritual component, like higher power, prayer, meditation,
Yeah.
but also like connection.
Yeah.
It's the opposite, in my opinion, of addiction and a lot of these mental health issues.
100%.
And we live in a society now that's the most comfortable in terms of, you know, technology and resources. I mean, we've basically created a lifestyle that doesn't take a whole lot of effort. You know, if we're hungry, we go to the grocery store or we drive through. You don't even have to get out of your car.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing. But
Hang on. Speak of the devil, that was my cardiologist that called. My calcium score is at 0.
Yay.
that good?
Yeah, it's good.
Oh, well, I don't know. What do
Now you could say congratulations.
Oh, I'm so happy for your calcium.
Well, going to anxiety, going back to that, one of my biggest issues is fear of heart attack. Like legit, you know? And it perpetuated after I had kids.
I could see
for
that.
whatever reason, you know? Leaving, knowing that like I'm going to pass away or whatever the case is. And over the past, and again, if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time over the past few months, I've been getting like these like
Heart
palpitations and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go from 0 to 100 in a matter of minutes. Like I'll feel a little in my chest, and I'm like, "Oh, no,
Right.
here it is. Get ready."
Well, then that
You know?
feeds into the panic.
And then it feeds into the panic. And it was something that, you know, I've been discussing with Dr. Tambini, another friend of mine, Dr. Stu, and they're all like, dude, just go see a cardiologist.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, fine. So I did. And he told me, you know, you're probably fine. Stop drinking caffeine. Stop using
So what
nicotine.
he's saying is it's more stress induced and
caffeine. Yeah,
caffeine.
caffeine and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, you know, he started going into like, you know, medical
so
stuff.
it's not like an underlying health issue.
Well, he sent me in for an echocardiogram
Mm-hmm.
and calcium score. And my echocardiogram came back 100% normal, and now my calcium score is
Good
normal.
job. Give me 5.
Yay,
So-
Tom.
Looks like I'm going out for pizza tonight. Yeah.
And washing it all down with a big Mountain Dew.
No, I don't like Mountain Dew. But yeah, the spirituality part, the connection part. And sorry, I wanted to, because I knew it was the doctor. That's why I wanted to make
That's
sure. I
okay. You
got
can
it.
edit that part out.
Yeah, the spirituality part, we can wrap up on this. I think it's, you know, and I talked about this in an episode not long ago. We tend to pull God off the mantle when needed, you know,
Yeah.
and it's unfortunate because it's like, you know, me being a Christian, like that, you know, part of my belief system is that like I need to rely on God, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and in the good times and the bad, not just pull God off the mantle.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
you know, so
Well, yeah, and a higher power, whatever each person chooses to call it, man, having a relationship with that higher power, it's big. And believing like that higher power is working in your life can just give you such a sense of comfort when you are going through those rough times, man.
Especially with anxiety. Yeah. It's based in fear.
Yeah.
And when you're in fear, you're not in faith. So
Nicole, let's wrap up with this. You were open just a little bit ago about depression for you, rooted in trauma. You take an SSRI?
I do, yeah.
Do you feel like it has helped you?
Big time. You know who helped me? Dr. T.
Yeah, see that? Dr. T.
I sat with her real quick and I told her that I closed the door and I started sobbing. And I was like, I'm struggling. And she's like, try it. You know, worst case, you don't like it, and you get off of it. So I tried it, and that helped me to then propel me with the behavior changes. So
yeah, and we can spend a couple minutes on this and then wrap it up. Oftentimes people, and I talked about this when we were recording with Sal DeStefano, and I referenced you guys about therapists having therapists and the importance of it. Oftentimes people look at, therapists and it's like, why would a therapist need a therapist? They're a therapist. Yeah. And it's like, could you imagine being in a position and your job is to help people through their shit every day and you not need a therapist? It's like,
yeah, you take it on. I mean, you can't help but be impacted by it.
Right.
And you can't pour from an empty cup. So if I'm neglecting self and my own healing, stuff like that, how am I ever going to help anybody with their healing? Do
sociopaths make good therapists?
What?
Well,
that's a whole other topic for a podcast.
Don't sociopaths not feel feelings? But I guess if you didn't feel feelings, you couldn't really help somebody with their feelings.
I would say the lack of empathy would be very difficult in therapy.
You have to be able to empathize with your clients, for sure.
But, with your experience, Nicole, having a therapist and the SSRIs and being mindful about where do you feel on a scale of where you were till now, given the action items that you've taken, where do you feel like you are?
Oh my gosh. Light years away.
And this wasn't that long ago.
What, the SSRI?
Well, when you closed the door, started sobbing.
Yeah, that was maybe 3.5 years ago, 3 years ago. Yeah. And it's made a huge difference. I mean, actually, it's funny. I just had therapy yesterday. I got a new therapist, and I'm looking forward to that journey. But ever since then, I mean, I could go back to years. So I was since I was 19, I'm a different woman than I am right now. But I would say the last few years have been really, I would say since 2018, when I went into Al-Anon and then, did therapy, got on an SSRI, all these things led up to where I am today, which is light years away, to answer your question. And I think it's important to, I tell clients all the time, I'm human too. If I'm in a shit mood or I have something going on and I was maybe just crying with Maya because of something I had going on, I'll tell them, listen, if you see me a little disheveled, it's because I have some stuff going on, but it's not personal. It's not you. I just want to be transparent because I'm human too. I think I don't care about the degrees are great and stuff. I'm proud of that because that's an accomplishment for me. But putting that aside, we're all the same and we're all just trying to do the best we can with what we have. And I think that humanity is important for them to see that I struggle too. It's super
important. And that's what I was just thinking when you were talking. So for so long, I think mental health issues, substance use issues have carried so much shame.
Yes.
They're shame driven, really.
Yeah.
And so many people don't talk about what's going on with them because the idea being, oh my God, they can't know that this is me. I'm so effed up.
Yeah.
I can't tell anybody what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, that this is going on with me. And in all reality, it's a human experience. And so talking about it as opposed to suffering in silence is another massive action item, and they're going to feel it. Depression is ego dystonic, meaning that they'll feel it. Ego syntonic is there's no concept of, oh, this is happening to me because I don't want to go into that. But anyways, ego dystonic means that they're going to feel the shift. They're going to go, oh, I don't feel right. Something's going on.
Yeah.
Right. And so when they start to feel that, as opposed to suffering in silence and just repressing it, ignoring it, sweeping it under the rug, coming out and saying, hey, this is going on with me, and understanding that it's a human experience. We all go through stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important that, like, you know, for people like myself and Maya in our position to practice what we preach too, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah. Like in getting help, I mean.
That was fun.
It was fun.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
1 hour and 3 minutes.
That was a long podcast. Let's wrap it up, Tom.
Where do you got to go?
I have sessions with clients
right.
that are depressed.
Yes, that need her assistance.
All right. That is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us. info@realrecoverytalk.com. Again, that's info@realrecoverytalk.com. And ultimately, we want to help you turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.